The woman who walked into my courtroom that Monday morning looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. She probably hadn't. What I found out in the next 20 minutes didn't just change her life, it exposed a system so broken I had to fix it myself. I've been doing this for over 40 years. I've seen every kind of person walk through that courtroom door. The guilty ones who swear they're innocent, the innocent ones too afraid to speak, the rich ones who think money is a legal argument, and the desperate ones who can't afford to fight back. But that Monday morning in November reminded me that some days this job still breaks your heart before it gives you a chance to fix anything. I got to court at 8:20 a.m, like I always do. My father used to say, "Frank, if you're not early, you're already behind." So I was at my desk with Christina's coffee, strong, black, the real Italian way, going through the morning docket when one file stopped me cold. I picked it up, felt the weight of it, and set my coffee down. Rosa Delgado, 34 years old, 11 unpaid municipal fines, total amount owed $7,000. Now, $7,000 is not a number you see in my courtroom for minor violations. The original violations, a parking citation and a broken taillight, had totaled just $400. But late fee had been stacked on late fee, processing charge on processing charge, until $400 had become $7,000. Something didn't feel right about this number. This wasn't a debt. This was a wall someone had built around a woman who couldn't afford to climb it. The first person through my courtroom doors that morning was not Rosa Delgado. It was Marcus Briggs. Tailored navy suit, leather briefcase. The kind of lawyer who charges $400 an hour. He represented Harrington Property Management, one of the largest landlord companies in Providence. His client had never once stepped foot in his courtroom. He sent Briggs instead to do what he couldn't stomach doing himself. Before the session even opened, Briggs had already filed a motion to garnish Rosa's wages. He then sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and pulled out his phone. I saw Rosa standing at the back of the gallery, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be closer. She was wearing scrubs, hospital housekeeping, light blue, not fresh. She had come here straight from her overnight cleaning shift that ended at 6:30 a.m. Her hair was pulled back with an elastic tie. She was holding a large accordion folder against her chest. Not a briefcase, not a bag, an accordion folder held together with a rubber band and a hair tie where the rubber band had stretched too thin. 3 kids at home. Marcus, 9, Destiny, 6, baby Elijah, 14 months. 3 jobs. Hospital cleaner at night, school cafeteria in the mornings, Uber on weekends. I thought about Briggs's leather briefcase. Then I thought about that folder. After 40 years on his bench, I still believe the whole story of a case is in the details you see before anyone opens their mouth. That folder told me she had kept every receipt, every letter, every payment attempt. It told me she had tried to fight back and hadn't known how. Her hand shook slightly as she held it, not from illness, but from the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from holding everything together alone. If you believe a mother working 3 jobs deserves to be heard, not buried in fees she doesn't owe, stay with me, because what I'm about to find in this file will make your blood boil. And what I do about it will remind you why justice still matters. I called the case at 9:05 a.m. Rosa moved from the back wall toward the front, walking carefully, like she was afraid of taking up too much space. The first thing she said to me was an apology, before I had spoken a single word to her, before there was anything to apologize for. That told me everything about what this process had already done to her. "Miss Delgado," I said gently, "you're right on time. Take a breath. Tell me in your own words what happened." She told me about the parking citation, a spot outside her building that had been rezoned without proper notice to residents. She hadn't known. Nobody on her block had known. She told me about the tail light, how she had the repair scheduled for the following Friday, the earliest she could manage without missing a shift. She scraped together $180 in 2 money orders. She had no checking account and sent them within 30 days. She had both receipts in the folder. Then the letters started coming. Late notice, second late notice, collections warning. She called the number on the letter, was put on hold for 47 minutes, then disconnected. Called again the next day, transferred 3 times, disconnected again. She wrote 4 letters, each one sent certified mail, each one signed for at the other end. She had every green return receipt card in the folder. Not one letter was ever answered. By the time the court summons arrived, $400 had become $7,000. I turned to Briggs. Counsellor, I'm looking at 4 certified mail receipts, all confirmed delivered to your client's office. Why did Miss Delgado receive no response to any of them? Briggs barely looked up. I can't speak to the company's internal mail procedures, Your Honour. The record shows a clear pattern of non-payment and the fees are contractually justified. Non-payment. He said non-payment while sitting 3 feet from a woman holding the receipts proving otherwise. Miss Delgado has money order receipts showing payment within the required window, I said. Are you telling this court your client has no record of receiving them? There may have been a processing error, Your Honour. Under the terms of the agreement, the burden of resolving payment discrepancies rests with the account holder. The burden rests with the account holder. I looked at him for a long moment. The courtroom was completely still. So your client's system failed to log her payments, charged her late fees on money she'd already sent, ignored 4 certified letters asking them to fix it, and your position is that the burden belongs to her. Briggs straightened his jacket. Your Honour, Miss Delgado had 18 months to resolve this account. Whatever personal difficulties she may be experiencing, this is ultimately a matter of personal responsibility. Personal responsibility. Said directly to a woman in yesterday's scrubs who had worked through the night and taken a bus to this courtroom to fight a $7,000 debt she didn't owe. The older woman in the 3rd row excelled sharply. I took off my glasses and set them on the desk. People who appear in my courtroom regularly know what that means. It means we are past the procedural part of the morning. Counsellor, I said, look at Miss Delgado. He turned his head slowly. This woman came here directly from an overnight shift. She brought every document she has ever generated in connection with this case because she knew the truth was in there and she was hoping someone would finally look at it. And your response on behalf of a company that ignored 4 certified letters is to talk to me about personal responsibility. I put my glasses back on. We are going to go through this file together, every page, and you are going to sit there quietly while we do. I set down my pen. I looked at Rosa Delgado and I asked her a question that had nothing to do with the fines, nothing to do with the fees, nothing to do with Marcus Briggs or Harrington Property Management or any of the paperwork sitting in front of me. I asked her about her children, not because it was part of the procedure, because after 40 years on this bench, you learned that the most important information in any case is almost never in the file. Miss Delgado, I said, you have 3 children. How old are they? She looked up at me. I think she was surprised I asked. People in her position, standing in front of a judge, facing $7,000 in debt, 2 hours off a night shift, they expect the process. They expect questions about payment plans and documentation and deadlines. They don't expect someone to ask about their kids. She blinked once, cleared her throat and answered, 9, 6 and 14 months, Your Honour. And who watches them when you work nights? The pause that followed that question was one of the longest silences I have ever sat through in 40 years on this bench. Not because Rosa didn't have an answer, but because the answer cost her something to say out loud. She pressed her lips together, looked down at the accordion folder she was still holding against her chest, and then looked back at me. My 9-year-old, she said quietly. Marcus. He knows how to warm up the bottles for Elijah. He's very responsible for his age. Her voice caught on the last word. Just slightly, the way a mother's voice catches when she's saying something she's had to make peace with, even though it still breaks her heart every single night. The courtroom went completely still. I mean that. I've had quiet courtrooms before, but this was different. This was the silence of people absorbing something that rearranges the way you see the world. A 9-year-old boy warming bottles for a 14-month-old baby, alone in an apartment at 2 in the morning while his mother cleaned hospital floors so they could all eat. I looked at Marcus Briggs. He had stopped typing. His phone was face down on the table. He was staring at a fixed point somewhere on the surface of the desk. Not at Rosa, not at me, anywhere but at the woman standing 3 feet from him. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I opened the file again and turned to a page near the back. There was a reference I had noticed earlier that morning, a notation about a hardship exemption request flagged by the clerk because it had been submitted but never resolved. I'd marked it with a paperclip. I found it now, and I read it carefully before I said another word. Miss Delgado, I have a notation here about a medical hardship exemption request you submitted 6 months ago. Can you tell me what that was for? She reached into the accordion folder. Even now, even standing in front of a judge while running on 3 hours of sleep, she knew exactly where everything was. She pulled out a document, a single sheet folded in thirds with a hospital letterhead at the top, and she held it out toward me. The bailiff brought it to my bench. I unfolded it and I read it, and then I read it again. Because sometimes you need to read something twice before you can fully accept what it says. Baby Elijah, 14 months old, Rosa's youngest, had been born with a congenital heart condition, a structural defect identified in his first week of life that required ongoing specialist monitoring and daily medication to manage. The medication alone cost $310 a month. Her Medicaid coverage paid for part of it. The rest came out of whatever Rosa had left after rent, groceries, utilities, and the bus fare that got her to 3 different jobs across the city. The letter was from his cardiologist, confirming the diagnosis, confirming the ongoing treatment, and confirming that without consistent medication, Elijah's condition could deteriorate rapidly. I set the letter down on my bench. I did not speak for several seconds. I want to be honest about what was happening inside me in that moment, because I think it matters. I wasn't performing. I wasn't calculating my next move. I was sitting with something that made me genuinely angry in the way that only injustice can make you angry when you spent your whole career trying to fight it. $7,000. The number this woman had been chased down for, had been threatened with wage garnishment over, had spent months writing unanswered letters about. $7,000 was nearly 2 years of Elijah's heart medication. I thought about my father. I thought about what he would have said if he'd seen this file. I already knew the answer. He would have said, "Frank, this isn't a debt collection case. This is a test of whether the system works for everybody or just for the people who can afford lawyers." I looked up at Marcus Briggs. "Counsellor," I said, keeping my voice level, "were you aware that Miss Delgado submitted a medical hardship exemption request to your client 6 months ago?" Briggs looked up from the table. For the first time since he'd walked into my courtroom, he looked like he wasn't entirely sure of himself. "I would need to review the complete file, Your Honour." "I have it right here," I said. "Submitted by certified mail 6 months ago. Signed receipt confirmed by your client's office. I have the tracking number, the delivery confirmation, and the date it was received. What I do not have, what does not exist anywhere in this file, is a single written response from Harrington Property Management. Not an approval, not a denial, not an acknowledgement that the woman with a sick baby had asked for help. Nothing. Silence. While the fees kept running. The courtroom was very quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet this time. Not the stunned silence from before. This was the quiet of people watching something that needed to be said finally being said. An older woman in the 3rd row of the gallery, someone who'd been sitting with her hands folded in her lap since the session began, pressed them tighter together. A young man near the aisle, probably waiting for his own case to be called, had stopped looking at his phone entirely. Briggs cleared his throat. "Your Honour, with respect, the company processes a high volume of cases. It's possible that the request was not routed to the appropriate department in a timely—" "Counsellor," I said it quietly. Just the one word. He stopped. "A mother submitted a medical hardship request for a baby with a heart condition. Your client received it, confirmed receipt, and chose not to respond for 6 months, while continuing to add fees to her account. I want you to think carefully before you use the word timely again in this courtroom." Briggs said nothing. He picked up his pen, put it back down, and looked at his notepad. I turned back to Rosa Delgado. She was watching me with an expression I've seen many times over 4 decades. The expression of someone who's been waiting a very long time for one person to simply pay attention. Not to fix everything, not to perform a miracle, just to read the file, just to ask the question, just to look up from the paperwork and see the human being standing in front of them. If you believe that a mother choosing between her baby's heart medication and a landlord's legal fees deserves real justice, share this right now. Because what I'm about to do to this $7,000 fine will show everyone watching that in my courtroom, paperwork does not beat people. People beat paperwork. I straightened the papers in front of me. I took a breath. And then I did what I've done every single day for over 40 years on this bench. I called the case by what it actually was, not by what the filing said it was. Because there is a difference between a debt and an injustice. And knowing that difference is the entire job. Miss Delgado, I began, I want to walk through this carefully because you deserve to understand exactly what I find and why. This is not going to be a complicated ruling. The facts in this file are not complicated. What is complicated is how a $400 debt became $7,000. And I intend to explain that in plain language so that everyone in this courtroom understands what happened to you. I turn first to the original violations. I want to be clear about something. I do not dismiss legitimate charges because a person is struggling. That is not justice. That is sentiment. And sentiment without accountability helps nobody in the long run. 2 of the 11 fines on Rosa Delgado's record were valid. The parking citation and the vehicle equipment violation were real. The original amounts properly assessed came to $180. And here is where the first finding matters. Rosa Delgado had paid $180. She had paid it in 2 installments by money order, and she had receipts for both transactions, dated, stamped, and sitting in that accordion folder she'd been holding since she walked through my door. Harrington Property Management had received the payments and failed to log them. Every fee that followed, every late charge, every processing fee, every collection cost had been stacked on top of a debt that no longer existed. On the original violations, I said, Miss Delgado owes nothing. She paid in full. The record will reflect that. Briggs shifted in his seat. He started to rise. I held up one hand without looking at him, and he sat back down. The remaining $6,820, I continued, represents fees generated entirely by Harrington Property Management's own administrative failures. Failed payment processing, failure to respond to certified correspondence, failure to review or acknowledge a medical hardship exemption request submitted 6 months ago and confirmed received. These fees did not arise from Miss Delgado's conduct. They arose from your client's indifference. Every dollar of that $6,820 is dismissed in its entirety, effective immediately. Now Briggs stood. Your Honour, my client will appeal this ruling. The contractual basis for these fees is clearly established in the lease agreement. A municipal councillor, sit down. My voice was quiet. It did not need to be loud. Your client had 4 certified letters and 6 months to respond to a medical hardship request from a mother whose infant son has a congenital heart condition. They chose not to respond. They chose to keep the fee meter running instead. And now they have sent you here this morning, before this session even opened, to file a wage garnishment motion against a woman who works 3 jobs and came to this courtroom directly from a night shift. Your client does not get to appeal the consequences of choices they made deliberately. Sit down. He sat down. He didn't pick up his pen again. I moved to the second part of my ruling. I am referring this matter to the Providence City Housing Authority for a full administrative review of Harrington Property Management's fee practices across all current and former tenants. If this happened to Miss Delgado, it happened to others. The pattern in this file, fees stacked on fees, certified letters ignored, hardship requests buried, does not appear accidental. It appears systematic. And systematic exploitation of tenants who lack the resources to fight back is not a business model I am prepared to ignore. I watched Briggs write something on his notepad. His handwriting had gotten smaller, tighter, the way people write when they're no longer in control of the room, and they know it. Thirdly, I said, I am ordering Harrington Property Management to pay Miss Delgado's court costs in full. She should not have been here today. She was here because your client manufactured a $7,000 debt out of $180 in legitimate fines that she had already paid. The cost of defending herself against a debt she didn't owe will not come out of her pocket. Finally, I am issuing a formal directive requiring Harrington Property Management to implement a written response policy for all hardship exemption requests. Every request must receive a written response within 30 days. Approval, denial, or request for additional documentation. Something. Silence is not an administrative response. Silence is a choice, and in this courtroom, that choice has consequences. I set my pen down. I looked at Marcus Briggs one last time. You can let your client know that the audit begins Monday. He did not respond. He was already reaching for his phone. Then I turned to Rosa Delgado, and I want to tell you something about that moment, because it is the moment I still think about when I think about that case. She hadn't moved. She was still standing at the defendant's table with the accordion folder pressed against her chest, and she was looking at me the way people look at someone when they're not entirely sure yet if what they just heard was real. Like she was waiting for the catch, like she had been disappointed enough times that she couldn't let herself believe it yet. "Miss Delgado," I said, "you walked into this courtroom this morning with a rubber-banded folder full of every receipt you've ever kept, every money order, every certified letter, every document you thought might matter someday. You kept all of it because you knew you had done nothing wrong and you needed to be able to prove it if anyone ever gave you the chance. Well, you have the chance, and the record is clear. You did everything right." She was crying now, not the loud, overwhelming kind, the quiet kind. The kind that comes when you have been carrying something heavy for a very long time and someone finally just takes it from your hands. Her shoulders dropped, she exhaled, and for a few seconds she just stood there and breathed. The way people breathe when they've been holding it in for months. You paid what you owed. You wrote the letters, you filed the exemption, you showed up to this courtroom in your work scrubs because you couldn't afford to miss a shift, even to fight for your own name. That is not irresponsibility. That is not someone who needs to be chased down for $7,000. That is someone who deserved better than what this system gave her. And today, I am going to give her a small piece of the justice she is owed. You go home to those 3 children tonight with nothing hanging over you. This is finished. The older woman in the 3rd row stood up first, then the young man near the aisle, then 3 or 4 others, one by one, without anyone asking them to, without any signal from me. Just people who had watched something real happen and wanted to mark it somehow. The retired postal worker near the window had taken his cap off and was holding it flat against his chest, the way men of his generation do when something matters. I did not stop them. I let it run. Some moments deserve to be witnessed properly. Briggs walked out quickly, briefcase in hand, phone already at his ear before he reached the door. He passed Rosa Delgado on his way out, and he did not look at her. She was still standing at the table, holding that accordion folder, tears running quietly down her face. She looked like someone who had just put down a weight she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. And I thought, that folder, she'll never need it for this again, but I'd be willing to bet she keeps it anyway. Because that's the kind of person she is, the kind who holds on, the kind who shows up, the kind this system was supposed to be built for. 6 weeks later, a letter arrived at my chambers. Not from a lawyer, not from the housing authority, not from anyone connected to the case officially. It was from Rosa Delgado, written by hand on notebook paper in careful cursive. She said the housing authority review had found 8 other Harrington tenants with identical fee patterns. A non-profit attorney had taken the case pro bono. Refunds were coming, but the part that stayed with me was at the bottom of the letter. She wrote, "Your Honour, Marcus asked me last week why I looked less tired. I told him a good man listened to us. He said, tell him thank you from me, a 9-year-old boy, thanking a judge he'd never met because his mother finally got to sleep. My father used to say, Frank, justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just one person in a courtroom deciding that the woman in the scrubs matters as much as the man with the briefcase." He was right. He was always right. I'm Frank Caprio. Remember, the most powerful thing you can do in this life is simply pay attention. Thanks for listening. God bless.